An armed guard responds to a shooting in a classroom. Students lie injured as a gunman runs loose in the hallways. This is only a drill, but one grounded in reality.
The set of circumstances here are to focus on really the worst possible situation you could have in the school.
The nation watched in horror as the Sandy Hook tragedy unfolded last December. The school shooting left 20 children and 6 teachers dead, which is why the Clarksville, Arkansas School District took matters into their own hands. Making use of a state law that allows licensed armed security guards on campus, the district recruited 20 volunteers made up of teachers, administrators, and other staffers.
And this gives us a avenue to protect them until regular law enforcement can get here.
But the idea of arming teachers alarms gun control advocates.
If the best cops in the world are inadvertently hitting innocent pedestrians, what's going to happen in a school if a gunman comes in and teachers pull out their guns?
School officials say training will be ongoing.
Now, this is not a solution to the problem. If there was a solution, we'd all go buy it and we'd have it in every school.
The earliest recorded school shooting was in 1966. 16 were killed and 32 injured before the shooter was shot by the police. This shooting was the first shooting where the shooter was an employee of the school. Alloway, the shooter, killed 7 co-workers and wounded 2 others before being taken into custody. Brenda Spencer was the first female school shooter in 1979. She killed a principal and a teacher and injured 8 students in addition to a police officer with the rifle she received that year for Christmas. In 1989, Patrick Purdy used an assault rifle, killing 5 students and injuring 29 others before committing suicide. The 90s had a large number of school shootings and averaged 1 shooting almost every year. Many of the shooters during this time were students of the universities and schools they targeted, and their ages ranged from 11 to 28 years old. In 1994, Clay Shrout killed both of his parents and his sisters before taking his prom date and 22 other students hostage at the local high school. He surrendered to the police, pleaded guilty, but mentally ill, and now lives in prison. In 1997, Michael Carneal, 14 years old at the time, fired into a prayer group meeting before the school day began. He killed 3 and injured 5 others in this shooting, and was sentenced to life in prison. In 1998, 2 boys, ages 11 and 13, killed 5 people and injured 10 others. They were sentenced to confinement until they reached the age of 21. Mitchell Johnson was released in 2005, and Andrew Gold was released in 2007. Johnson later was convicted on various state and federal charges and is currently serving 22 years in prison. A day after killing his parents, Kip Kinkle opened fire in Springfield, Oregon, killing 2 and wounding 25 others. He pleaded guilty to murder and attempted murder, and is currently serving a 111-year sentence. The shooting at Columbine in 1999 was the last and most infamous shooting of the 90s. 12 classmates and a teacher were killed and 26 wounded before Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold committed suicide in their school library. Almost 6 years after Columbine, school shootings began again, and the recent shootings today have left an increasing amount of victims than the past shootings. Our generation's first memorable school shooting was the 2007 shooting on the campus of Virginia Tech. Cho, the shooter, 23 years old, shot and killed 32 people before turning the gun on himself. In 2008, the shooter killed 5 classmates and injured 21 others in Illinois before also committing suicide. In 2012 had 3 different school shootings throughout the year. In February, T.J. Lane, age 17, killed 3 students and injured 2 others at Chardon High School in Ohio. Lane is being tried as an adult and has pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. In April, 7 students were killed and 3 others injured on the campus of Oikos University in California before the shooter was apprehended. He has pleaded not guilty and is currently awaiting trial. The most recent shooting that shocked our nation was the December shooting of Sandy Hook Elementary School in Connecticut. The shooter, Adam Lanza, killed 27 people, including 20 children. The shooting is just the latest in a series of violent outbursts at schools and universities over the past few decades.
The number of school shootings has overall increased over the past decade. This is largely attributed to the rise in violence among children and teenagers in their home and social settings. Since 1990, there have been 107 school shootings with casualties, totaling 332 deaths.
The Gun-Free School Zone Act of 1990 is a federal United States law that prohibits any individual from knowingly possessing a firearm at a place that the individual knows or has reasonable cause to believe is a school zone. This act was taken into question when the Supreme Court was faced with the United States v. Lopez case. Alfonso Lopez was a 12th grade student who carried a concealed and loaded handgun into his high school. He was arrested and charged under Texas law with firearm possession on school premises. The next day, the state charges were dismissed after federal agents charged Lopez with violating the act. The Gun-Free School Zone Act was enacted by Congress under the Interstate Commerce Clause of the U.S. Constitution. The court ruled in the case United States v. Lopez that there was insufficient connection with interstate commerce to warrant such an enactment involving guns in school zones. Chief Justice Ryan Hurst stated that the federal law has nothing to do with commerce or any sort of economic enterprise, however broadly one might define those terms. Believers in the act made amendments to it, making it constitutional. They stated, Congress can legitimately conclude that the threat of gun violence around schools hampers education and thus the economy vitality of the nation. The new act is called the Gun-Free School Zone Amendments Act of 1995. States that have previously not allowed guns to be on school campuses are now making new provisions that allow them. For example, David Thweet, a superintendent for a Texas school district, came up with the Guardian Plan, which allows teachers in his school district to carry guns. Also, starting October 1st, 2013, guns will be allowed in locked cars on campus in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Some students say there's one thing that makes them feel safer. Their teachers are armed.
I like it because it kind of makes me feel safer. Because, I mean, it's Harold and we don't have a police station here.
Since 2007, the Harold School District allows teachers with concealed handgun licenses to carry guns in the classroom, a move the superintendent is convinced will prevent a school shooting here.
My goal is if someone comes in to try to hurt my little ones, that they are killed.
At Edison High School in Tulsa, Oklahoma, armed guards patrol the hallways.
I would rather have it and never have to use it than not have it and run into a situation where I couldn't do my job fully.
About 28,300 schools have armed security staff on campus, according to the National Center for Education Statistics. 20% of those primary schools, 54% middle schools, 68% of those high schools have armed security. And since the tragedy at Sandy Hook, lawmakers across the country now pushing a new solution to arm teachers in classrooms with guns.
You should be able to carry your handgun anywhere in this state.
I wish to God she had had an M4 in her office locked up.
Gun advocates point to a case in 1997 when an armed vice principal at a high school in Pearl, Mississippi stopped a 16-year-old gunman who had already shot and killed 2 students. But at a school in suburban Chicago, where the focus is high-tech security but no guns, 4th grade teacher Dara Sacker says training teachers to be sharpshooters and expecting them to be at the right place at the right time is unrealistic.
I wouldn't feel comfortable being armed. I think it'd be better to just keep the guns out of schools rather than armed teachers.
Bill Bond, who was principal at Heath High School in Paducah, Kentucky, when a gunman killed 3 students in 1997, believes more guns will create more problems.
If I'd have contested him with a gun, he still had 5 loaded guns and 1,000 rounds of ammunition. I think it might have just continued on.
Okay, so yeah, I think guns in classroom would deter shooters. I mean, when you look at it, we are basically fish in a barrel. There's only one way in, one way out. We don't have any way of escape. And for safety reasons, I mean, why not? It's if you have a concealed carry permit, I think you ought to be allowed to do that. A shooter basically comes to a campus because they know there are nobody can defend themselves. So if them thinking about walking into a classroom with, in our case, we have 55 students, them walking into a classroom and pulling a gun, if they have 55 guns pointing back, I really doubt they're coming into that class. If nothing else, I think at least the professors ought to be allowed to have weapons. As the law states right now, we can bring one on campus, but we have to leave it locked in our car. Well, that's ridiculous. You might as well leave it locked at home, because the shooter's not going to wait for you to go get your gun out of your car and come back and then confront them. So yeah, I feel I'm completely confident that weapons would deter that. The state of Florida, carjackings dropped 50% when the state of Florida passed concealed carry permits.
There are 18 states that already allow guns to be carried by adults in school with different precautions ranging from only the approval of the superintendent to the entire school board's approval. The 18 states include Alabama, California, Connecticut, Hawaii, Idaho, Iowa, Kentucky, Massachusetts, Mississippi, Montana, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York, Oregon, Rhode Island, Texas, Utah, and Wyoming.
More guns in schools. That was part of NRA Executive Vice President Wayne LaPierre's message when he addressed the nation Friday in response to the shooting tragedy in Newtown, Connecticut. He blamed the media for making guns, quote, a bad word. He blamed video games, and he blamed movies for America's violent streak. He never once blamed guns.
I call on Congress today to act immediately to appropriate whatever is necessary to put armed police officers in every single school in this nation.
LaPierre is proposing a free, NRA-run security program to protect kids in schools, saying the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun.
The NRA is going to bring all its knowledge, all its dedication, and all its resources to develop a model National School Shield Emergency Response Program for every single school in America that wants it.
In Northeast Indiana, Douglas A. Harp, the sheriff of Noble County, offered to deputize teachers to carry handguns in their classrooms. A community member donated $27,000 in firearms to the effort. School officials were on the verge of signing off when the plan fell apart after an insurer refused to provide workers' compensation to schools with gun-carrying staff members. The Oregon School Boards Association, which manages liability coverage for the majority of the Oregon's school districts, recently announced a new pricing structure that would make districts pay an extra $2,500 in annual premiums for every staff member carrying a weapon on the job. EMC Insurance Companies, the liability insurance provider for about 90% of Kansas school districts, sent out a letter to its agents saying that schools permitting employees to carry concealed handguns would be declined coverage.
Are the president's kids more important than yours? Then why is he skeptical about putting armed security in our schools when his kids are protected by armed guards at their school? Mr. Obama demands the wealthy pay their fair share of taxes, but he's just another elitist hypocrite when it comes to a fair share of security. Protection for their kids and gun-free zones for ours.